can the gospel narrative be fueled?
Yeah.
And how, in some ways, the narrative you gave, right, and this is me now not asking a question, but talking about, is that sometimes the gospel can be for bulls.
Yeah, yeah,
But we, as evangelicals, as a professor of evangelism,
yeah.
is the gospel fuel? And if so, how?
Yeah. Well, my cynical answer is the way the word gospel has been used in evangelical circles, no, because it's a hyper-individualized, there's a particular way of understanding it that is so culturally and societally inflected, right? And as an evangelism professor, I spend my time lamenting and agonizing over this, of how much of our evangelistic methods are so steeped in Western culture, including the word gospel. And one of the exercises that I have my students do is I want you to define what that word means. And the answers are like all over the board. And a lot of it depends on am I Presbyterian Reformed, am I Baptist, am I Southern Baptist, am I Pentecostal? And so some of that is sharpening what that is. And our more recent president, Mark Labberton, didn't use the word gospel, he used the word evangel, which is the biblical equivalent, the Greek equivalent of that. And so that actually, if we could use that type of understanding of the evangel, that to me would be like, yes, that is the counter narrative. But sadly, like you're pointing out in the history, the narrative of white supremacy has been fueling the way we understand the gospel, right? So that, I've literally been told by white members of my denomination and those who had authority over me around my curriculum, crazy, but that what I was preaching was not the gospel. I said, well, whose version of the gospel are you talking about? Well, this is what our version of the gospel, and it was this hyper-individualistic for spiritual laws. It's like, no, I'm not saying that's not the gospel, but that's very culturally inflected. So that's where I would say, okay, the counter-narrative is the gospel. In fact, that's the whole gospel story. There is a broken narrative in our world, and Christ came to demonstrate and live the counter-narrative of the gospel. But that's where I would say, okay, but if we're going to use that language as the appropriate response, then we've got to have a more robust and maybe even a better way of understanding that. So the way I've explained it in my class is the difference between truth possessed and truth pursued. The gospel is truth pursued, it is not truth possessed. And truth possessed is a Western mentality. I own the truth, and therefore, in my ownership of the truth, my job to share the gospel is to have you agree to my principles of the gospel. I first learned this concept in college when I was taking a political theory class. And the political theory was talking about the differentiation between truth pursued and truth possessed. And that especially in 20th century political history, those who had a truth-possessed mentality were the Hitlers and the Stalins. They owned the truth, and their job was to get that truth, their good news gospel, out there. Compare that to those who had a truth-pursued mentality. That would be Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. They believe there is a truth, but our job is not to own that truth, but to pursue that truth. And that, by the way, is clearly biblical. Because when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father but through me, I think it's pretty clear it means that I can't own the truth if Jesus is the truth. Any claim for me to own and possess the truth would be heresy. I can do what he said, which is to follow him, which is the pursuit of truth. And so that's where the gospel message of, do I own the truth or am I pursuing the truth? Is the gospel a set of propositions that I own, and my job is to pass that on for you, and once you check the list of my propositions, now you're a Christian? Then no, that's not the narrative I want to be a part of. But is there a truth of who Jesus is, and the pursuit of that truth? That feels different than the ownership of that truth.
That's good.